Every single person wants to hang out with me the moment that I start filming. Hello everyone, my name is Marchie, welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be reviewing the 24 books I read in 2024. That wasn't planned, it just happened that way, and for that we all give thanks. Okay, so I'll be rating these on a 5-point scale based on my enjoyment of the book. Now, most of the books that I read in 2024 were not pieces of literature that are going to be studied for their exquisite prose or unique lens on the world. They're for enjoyment, but that doesn't lessen their validity in being written, read, or enjoyed. And my enjoyment is what? Say it with me. Subjective, right? So if you disagree, let me know in the comments so that we can fight about it and this video gets views so I can make money after TikTok's banned. Anyway, rating these based off of enjoyment is also kind of funny for me because I have this habit of getting like insanely invested into a book while I'm reading it, and like it's all I can think about and it's all I want to do, and I just get so wrapped up in the story and the world building and all the things, and 2 weeks later I'm like, yeah, it was pretty good. Yeah, it was good. I'd recommend it. I don't know why that is, but I think it's with the distance away from it, I'm able to be like, okay, so I enjoyed it. I absolutely enjoyed the process of reading it, but I wouldn't say it's like the best book I've ever read. A lot of the books that I read this year, I read as audiobooks on Libby. It's completely free to use. You just need a library card for your local library. Why are we buying a million books? You don't need to. They're right there. You just have to go sign up and say that you live nearby. That's it. Go get a library card.
Go get a library card.
The first book that I read in 2024, which I think honestly ranks in the top 3 of the books that I read last year, which is Crying at H Mart. And I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. And my only gripe with this book is that you won't be crying just at H Mart, you'll be crying everywhere because, oh my gosh, this book, I'm gonna start crying right now. It's a memoir of Michelle Zauner, who is an indie pop artist who wrote Japanese Breakfast. It's a memoir centering around the loss of her mother at the age of 25. As someone who is white from a predominantly white community, I always find it so amazing to read books from the point of view of people who live entirely different cultures and entirely different family systems than I do. And this was a great example of that. There's a certain amount of deference towards older generations that just aren't really part of my culture the way that I grew up, the way that they're described in this book. There's another moment where they go to Korean bathhouses together, and it's a communal bathhouse, all of one gender, and they're all just nude. And in the book, there's a moment where she's like, isn't it so nice we don't find like it weird to be naked around each other? And that would be extremely strange for me and my family. That would be an uncomfortable experience in my opinion. But that's just the difference between cultures. The biggest cultural thing in this book is food and the long descriptions of food. So much of this woman's grief is surrounding her trying to make the food that her mother made. It so tied to not only a specific culture and a specific family, but a specific individual, because mothers especially, generally, are the ones who decide a menu in a household. So it is so tied to that specific person of like what they're known for being good at, what they're known for being bad at, things that they always have stocked in the fridge, things that you'll never see there. Like my mother was an amazing cook, but she couldn't make bread to save her life. But other households around me, they had a sourdough starter that had been in their family for decades. Like there's such specific differences in not only family systems but individuals on what food brings to their household. And then on top of that, we're talking about Korean food. It was an incredible read and I cannot recommend it enough. I just also recommend you don't do what I did, which is start it at work. Don't do that. Read this in a place that you feel comfortable crying in, because you will, be crying everywhere. Next book I read was The Starless Sea. Oh, also, most of the books that I read this year were audiobooks. I still count them as reading, because that's reading. Depending on if I read it as a book or an audiobook, it changes the way that I was able to intake the information or like plot, and that comes into account a couple of different times, specifically with the next book that I read, Starless Sea. I listened to it while I was at work, so my entire attention was not on the book itself, and I kind of like jumped in and out of it because of conversations that had to happen or whatever. Made reading Starless Sea really difficult for me. Basic plotline of this book. The protagonist finds a book in a library that describes his childhood. The book gets lost and then he goes on a journey finding it, and in finding it he finds out about this ancient library and these this like secret society of librarians that have been housing all of these books, and in the process he reads other books, or we get like points of view from other people associated with this like ancient library system that they're trying to save. And the tableaus within the books, like the books within the books, are so gorgeous and they're so well written, but I had a really hard time jumping in and out of what was a book within a book, what was a story within the story, and then coming back out of it and keeping the through line of the main story. Like, I was so much more invested in the individual stories that were being told rather than like the overall plot line. And because I was reading it as an audiobook at work, I had a hard time keeping track of who was who and where they were. So I just had a hard time following it. But the way that it was written was so beautiful that I ended up giving this a 2.5 out of 5. I think a lot of that was on me though. So it's a recommendation, but like a light recommendation. You know what I mean? Third book I read was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I loved this book so much, and I'm not surprised that I did because I've heard a lot of people recommend it, like the Green brothers I've heard recommend it before, and people that I trust with like good literary sense. My biggest disappointment with this book was the fact that I feel like my Shakespeare nerd card should be taken away, because I didn't realize until like 3/4 of the way through that Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow was a reference of Macbeth, because obviously it is. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow creeps in the petty pace from day to day. I know that line. It just didn't click in my head that those two things. Stupid. It follows this friendship between Sam and Sadie, who were childhood best friends, and then they had a rift, and then they become friends again in adulthood, and then they end up making a video game together that becomes a video game production house, whatever you would call that. And all of those insecurities and ugly truths and the like messiness of relationships, especially ones that start from the very beginning of childhood, impact their adult relationship, and they have to figure out whether they're able to work through it and continue or not. I love books that are about friendship. I think that there's so many books about romance, which, as there should be, they're so much fun to read. I wish there was a love for the genre of friendship books as much as there was a love of the genre of romance books, because as important, if not more important than romance in your life, because romances can come and go, but like some friendships will never die. And I think stories surrounding friendships should be just as important. Slight spoiler for this book. The friendship does not evolve to a romantic partnership. I wish there were more stories about that, because men and women can just be friends. Absolutely they can. There's no reason that they can't be. My favorite example of this is Ron Swanson and Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec. They are a perfect example of two people that are great friends and would be terrible romantic partners. They have a lot in common, it's just they also have big differences, but they're still able to be friends. The biggest thing that I love about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is that the reason that the relationship struggles is not because of some really basic miscommunication trope, or one person is just holding back all their feelings and so the other one is just constantly guessing as to like what. Like, it's not a toxic relationship. It is truly because of just like ugly feelings that we all have and deal with that like come up in relationships and cause rifts and require really difficult conversations to like work through. And some people are willing to have those conversations and some people are absolutely not. There's also aspects of the relationship that are difficult because of external circumstances that they didn't have any control over. And that's absolutely why relationships break down. Nothing about their relationship would have been entirely different if they had just had one simple conversation. And that is like honestly my least favorite trope in romance books, is miscommunication, or just like a complete lack of ability to just talk to your partner. The next book I will hold deeply within my soul until the end of my time, because it was so beautiful. I cried so much, and of course it's written by Sumon Kid. It is the Book of Longings. Basic plot view. This isn't a spoiler. This is like basically what you would read on the back of the book. Young woman, Anna, in biblical times, who grows up in a very influential family. She desperately wants to be a writer and has this like, it's almost described as this otherworldly like need to write and document, especially document women's narratives and the women in her lives. She's betrothed to this old man and she runs away from the betrothal, which like completely wrecks her entire family. And in the process of running away, she meets a man from Nazareth named Jesus, and they hit it off. It's so interesting because you'd think that this book would be entirely about Jesus, right? And it really isn't. He's a big part of the book, absolutely, but they focus on the time. The book is written within the time period of all of the time that we don't know anything about Jesus in the Bible. So from when he's like a younger man to when he starts his ministry. This is when we get into spoilers. In that time, he becomes a husband and a father, and you see their relationship, and it's so beautiful, and he fully supports his wife's like desires and the reasons that she's a little bit different than like the rest of the women in his life. But the reason that this book is so phenomenal is because of the female friendships in it. And I think female friendships are just so, there's something so specific about them, and I don't know how to explain why this book, I've yet to be able to explain in words why this book is so profoundly good at describing the close ties that women can have with each other. And it's not that I think that men and women can't, or that men and men can't. I just think that there is something so unique to women standing next to each other saying that I will go through hell with you. And this book does that 30 times over. Anna, the main character, has an aunt who they go on a journey looking for the aunt's daughter that was taken away from her. When they leave is about around the same time that Jesus starts his ministry. So you get these like little tidbits of information from news sources or from messengers about like where in Jesus's story we are compared to where Anna is with her aunt. The way that it ends, which I won't say anything about, but the way that it ends is like so incredibly special to me. I sobbed for the last like 20 pages. It is so beautiful, and I just couldn't recommend this book enough. I gave it a 6 out of 5. Like, I'm so obsessed with this book, and I absolutely have must read Sue Monk Kidd's other books, specifically The Secret Life of Bees, which I have on my shelf and I plan to read this year. Moving on from the crying. And what a perfect thing to move on to. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I adored this book. I already knew I was going to enjoy this book, and I'm so glad that I followed it after the Book of Longings, because it's just a perfect like juxtaposition of two books that are really well written, but just so wildly different. So if you don't know anything about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I honestly didn't really know much about it. I just knew that it was a really famous title. About this man, this Englishman, who gets randomly picked up by an alien right before Earth is completely destroyed, and he goes on a bunch of wacky space adventures, and you meet a bunch of different types of aliens. The joke of the meaning of life being 42 comes from this book. I didn't know that. I knew that joke, I didn't know where it came from. And the thing I love most about this book is that it can easily just be a fun, fantastical space adventure, right? Like, you can just read it for just that enjoyment. But if you want to look at it with a philosophical lens, it's also really interesting to dig into how it exemplifies all of these different ways that people try to answer the question of what is the meaning of life, and people being all of these species of aliens and all of these different individuals. There are certain aliens that like construct these entire giant supercomputers that take millennia to answer the question of what the meaning of life is, which the answer is 42, so they have to come up with this even better supercomputer that takes even more millennia to answer why they answered 42. There's specific characters that try to basically become gods in a certain sense and try to control their own destiny through randomness. People like the main character, Arthur Dent, who just kind of like tumble through life and just kind of take whatever life is willing to give them and to make the best of it. And there are those who are just like completely hands off, like I know that I'm not in control of any of this, and I'm not even going to attempt to, and I'm just going to carve out this one tiny little bit of my life, and like I'm content with that. You can take it both ways, and that's why I really, really enjoyed this book. 5 out of 5. The next book I read was Lessons in Chemistry. This was another audiobook that I read, and I liked it. I enjoyed it. Basic plotline: Elizabeth Zott is a chemist in the 60s. She deals with a ton of sexual harassment and assault, and through a strange series of events, she ends up becoming a host of a cooking show. Instead of becoming a glassy-eyed housewife that's like, and now we put the meatloaf in the oven for 45 minutes and make sure the children are quiet. Let your husband come home and relax. He's had a hard day, much harder than yours. Like, instead of that kind of thing, she explains the chemistry around why the things that she cooks works. In the process, she's able to show people that, first of all, a woman can be intelligent in this way. She shows women, you are capable and you should follow your passions and you are an intelligent person. Elizabeth Zott also has a dog. Can you get a dog POV, which is really fun. The dog's name is 630, which is just a weird thing that I enjoyed. The book also became a TV show that I have not seen. I also haven't heard any reviews about it, so I have absolutely no idea anything about it, but I know Brie Larson stars in it, and I generally enjoy her. I had a hard time rating this book because I enjoyed it. I thought it was well written. I read it around the time I kept seeing advertisements for the TV show, and the way that the TV show was being sold as like this groundbreaking feminist story, which I just don't think it can be a groundbreaking feminist story if the whole point of this, if it's second wave feminism. I think it's second wave, right? Where it's just like, women are intelligent and shouldn't have to stay in the kitchen. They're also full human beings. I know that there's so many people, especially in America, that still don't think that that's the case. As a general consensus, I feel like we've kind of moved past that narrative. Maybe can start having a more complex conversation around maybe some intersectional feminism. It's not groundbreaking. We're not in the 1950s anymore. You know what I mean? If this was written in the 1960s, then it would be really groundbreaking. The fact that it was written in like 2022, that's not the fault of the book. Like, it told the story that it was trying to tell, and it did it well. So you know what I mean? I gave it 3 out of 5. Number 7, Midnight Library. This is a really fun book. This is a book that I got off of BookTok. It is the story of this girl who has you meet her at this really tumultuous point in her life, and she ends up attempting to end her life. So instead of an afterlife, she goes to a library that every book is a different moment in her life that she'd made a decision, and what, if she had made a different decision, what that life would have looked like. So she gets to experience all of these different universes, all these different timelines of her own life, where she's a rock star, or an Olympic swimmer, or a glaciologist, or a mother, or she married that person or that person, and she needs to decide which life she wants to stick with. Very much Sylvia Plath Fig Tree vibes, which I really enjoyed, and I won't spoil the ending for you, but I think I read it right at the right time, because I struggle a lot with being at what I hope is the beginning of my life, and like constantly feeling like every day I'm making decisions. If I spend my energy this way, then I'm not spending it this way, and that means that I'm just continuing to close more and more doors the older that I get. That's been really hard for me to not stress out about, and I think a lot of this book is helpful in that stress around you're going to end up in the best life for you because you're picking it. And then I jumped into yet another BookTok favorite, Fourth Wing. Now here's the thing about romantasy. If you haven't invested in romantasy at all, here's my pitch for you. You're not going to Fourth Wing, ACOTAR, Throne of Glass, any of these romantasy things. You're not going to eat a meal there, okay? There's no meat and potatoes. This is all dessert reading. This is all cotton candy. We are there for the enjoyment, for the sugary pleasures. We are not looking for complex flavors here, okay? There is no complex flavors here. And that's okay. That's okay. You just have to know that going in. And that's especially true of Fourth Wing. It's very much of its own genre, and you just kind of have to get past the tropes. Like, you can't think too much about it. You just have to accept this is where we're going at any given moment. The basic plot is Violet joins a deadly war college, earning her right to become a dragon rider. Her dragon is mated to a dragon whose rider is the son of her family's sworn enemy, but they have to spend time together because their dragons spend time together. You can't possibly guess where this goes. It's a great read. I really enjoyed it. I read it so fast. It did exactly what you want it to do. It's a romantasy book about dragons. It made me giggle and kick my feet and squeal. It made me want to have sex on a dragon. And that is entirely why I'm here. So then I immediately jumped to Iron Flame, which Iron Flame extends the story. I enjoyed extending the story. There were some twists in there I didn't expect. It falls into my least favorite trope of just miscommunication and just one part holding back and blaming the other partner for why they're holding back. It's just toxic enough that you're like, this is a bad relationship. But then the ending twist, which I of course will not spoil for you, the ending twist explains a lot of that behavior. It doesn't make it okay, but it explains it. And then the very ending, I was like, and I thought that this entire series was out, so the fact that I have to wait so long for the next one, it actually made me crinkle inside, like a broken slinky. Like, I just... So Fourth Wing I gave a 4 out of 5, and Iron Flame I gave a 3 out of 5. So then I was in a little bit of a romantasy kick, and I got a great recommendation from my friend Hannah, who is the one I did a review of A Court of Thorns and Roses with. She recommended From Blood and Ash, which I really did enjoy. Here's where we get into the romantasy that is like... The basic setup of the story I really enjoyed. It's this young woman who, the chosen from birth, and she's supposed to usher in this ascension period, so every second of her life and every stitch of clothing that she wears and things that she says and who she's around is controlled by this like government, I guess, or this religion, I guess is one and the same. She wants to fight the real evil that's coming into her town, so she sneaks out and fights this evil, and in the process she meets a sexy stranger, and it's really great. I genuinely really enjoyed reading this. The problem was is that every single twist, which there were quite a few in the book, I called from the second any plot around it was introduced. I was like, and that's gonna happen, and then that's gonna happen, and then that's gonna happen. And that's exactly how it went. Like, I still finished it. I still really enjoyed it. It definitely, like, docked points for me. So I gave it a 3 out of 5. But I enjoyed it enough to get to the second one, Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. I can't remember if I finished that book. I'm gonna be so honest with you. And the fact that I can't remember if I finished it really should tell you how good it was. It's the same thing. It's a good anti-hero, love interest, enemies to lovers, fantastical romantasy. I don't think I actually finished it because I don't remember how it ends. But the fact that I didn't finish it and didn't even realize I didn't finish it until right now, I'm gonna stick with my 2 out of 5 rating then. Okay, so after reading so much romantasy, I was like, I need a break from this, so I picked up Clytemnestra, which falls into this popular trend that's going on that I love, which is it's a retelling of Greek stories and Greek myths, focusing on specific characters that usually aren't focused on. To explain Clytemnestra, you kind of have to understand a basic understanding of the Trojan War, so I'm going to do a brief overview of the Trojan War in case you don't know it. And just so you know, this does spoil other books like Song of Achilles, which I highly recommend, and the Odyssey, if you haven't read that. Basics of the Trojan War. Helen is a Greek woman, a Greek princess. Queen falls in love or is kidnapped, depending on the story, by Paris of Troy. Now, so they run away or kidnap to Troy. So the Greeks take that opportunity to rescue Helen by going after Troy and trying to sack it and destroy it because Troy has become this like powerhouse of a nation. The Greeks want a reason to like overtake its glories and riches. So they use Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships, as this excuse to go to war. So Agamemnon, who's a big character in the Trojan War, he's one of the great generals of the war, and they get everybody, all of the people up and ready to go to arms, and they try to sail to Troy, and there's no wind. They're on the beach for weeks, and they're losing momentum, and people are deserting, and they need to leave for this war right away. The generals get together, and they decide that in order to set sail, they need to give an offering to the gods. Agamemnon decides to sacrifice his own daughter. They can set sail, and it works. The daughter, thinking that she's going to be married to Achilles, the great hero of their time, she walks up thinking that she's getting married to Achilles, turns left, and instead she's killed on an altar. They set sail. 10 years of war happen. The Trojan horse happens. They sack Troy. They go home. The Odyssey is Odysseus trying to get back home after being at Troy for 10 years. So within the context of the Trojan War, Clytemnestra is the wife of Agamemnon, but actually he is not her first husband. Her first husband she fell in love with, they had a baby together, and Agamemnon killed him and her kid so that she could be available to be married. She's also sisters to Helen, who started the whole thing. So while Agamemnon is gone, she's in charge of the city of Sparta, I think? Anyway, she's in charge of the city and is in power for the 10 years that Agamemnon is gone and hates him the entire time. What she's most famous for is the fact that Agamemnon, spoiler alert, Agamemnon comes home from the Trojan War and she kills him. Now, she's always depicted as a villain in all of these stories. She's very conniving, very villainous, and what I love about this book is that it does not try and paint her, in my opinion, this is not true of everyone's opinion of this book, in my opinion, I don't think they try and paint her as this moral, good person. She is she's a murderer, ambitious, power-hungry, 100%. They explain over and over how her liberty is taken from her and why she has the point of view that she does. The severe actions she takes are deemed necessary because of her life experience. And that's what I find so interesting about Clytemnestra, why I enjoyed reading this book so much. She doesn't shy away from her viciousness. She is cruel. Some of her own children end up hating her because of her actions, but it's so beautifully written. Some of my favorite quotes being, "There's no peace for a woman with ambition, no love for a woman with a crown. She loves too much, she is lustful. Her power is too strong, she is ruthless. She fights for vengeance, she is mad. Kings are brilliant, mighty, godlike. Queens are deadly, shameless, accursed." Biggest quote that, like, I was listening to the audiobook and I had to pause it because I needed to breathe after listening to this quote. At the very end of the book, her lover asks her, like, why is it so important for you to kill Agamemnon? Like, we could just run away together and have a great life. Like, why do you need to kill him? And she says, in talking about her daughter, she says, "She was like the sun, and my husband took her from me. And for what? He didn't kill her for vengeance, ambition, or greed. He killed her for a puff of wind." It's so obvious why someone could go to the lengths of wanting to murder someone. I mean, this man has already murdered people that she loved, but this was their child together, and he sacrificed her for wind, for a puff of wind. And these are men who are claiming to go after Helen for the sanctity of marriage, for the protection of their wives and their children, but in order to get there, to do all of these great gloriful acts in the name of protecting their people, they killed their own kid. They killed their daughter. And there are so many stories in both Greek myths and beyond of men who go after and kill and rampage and do horrible acts in the name of justice over much less crimes than Clytemnestra. Whether or not you think that she's a hero, I don't think she's a hero. This book gives you context for why she takes such extreme actions, which is why I enjoyed it so much. In this kick of reading about Greek myths, I went on to my next book, which I think might be my least favorite book of the year, which is called The Maidens. Basic plotline. Mariana is a group therapist who receives a call from her niece Zoe, whose roommate and best friend has been murdered, so Mariana goes down to help Zoe, and through a very flimsy reasoning decides that she's going to try and find the murderer herself. And while this character is set up to, you're supposed to think that she is intelligent and rational and thoughtful, none of her actions prove to be that way. In her investigation, she finds ancient Greeks professor Edward Fosca, who has a group of young women that are his favorites, that they self-describe themselves as the Maidens. He is the number one suspect. It doesn't even matter if he actually killed the character, because he's so creepy with his students and with Mariana that you want him thrown in jail anyway. It is terribly contrived. It's not well written. I didn't really enjoy it. I'm honestly shocked that I finished it. I think it was I need to just listen to something so I don't rampage at my work, because this was right before I quit. Yeah, I gave it 1 out of 5 because there was a twist in it that I didn't expect, but you don't need to read it to find out what it is. It's really okay. You can skip that one. After reading such a bad book, it was October, and I was like, I want to read something that I know is going to be good and is, for the spooky times. So I picked up Dracula, and I was very excited about it, and my excitement was short-lived because I really disliked this book a lot. It's actually explained to me a comment a friend of mine made that really confounded me for a while. I took this friend to see a really great production of Romeo and Juliet, and she's not a Shakespeare person at all, and so when we went and saw it, I was like crying, and I was like, oh, it was so good, it was such a great production, and I was like, what did you think? And she went, I don't know, it's just, the ending is so cliche. Cliche? What are you talking about? The ending of Romeo and Juliet can't be cliche. It's the reason it's cliche. What are you talking about? And then I read Dracula, and I went, oh, I understand what she means now, because Dracula is the origin of all of the things that we know about Dracula, about vampires, minus Edward's shiny the skin of a killer Bella. Outside of that, Dracula is like the origin of, or like the most famous version of all of those reasons that we know about vampires now. And so it wasn't interesting at all, like the more they found out about Dracula, because I was like, right, no, we all know that. The other reason I disliked it is because it uses my least favorite literary device, which is when a story is told entirely in letters and journal entries. And I think an occasional journal entry, an occasional letter is absolutely, can be very useful and very good in a book. But when the entire story is told through a journal entry, especially a book that is supposed to hold suspense, it destroys any element of suspense because, of course, the person didn't die. They're writing a letter about it. They're writing their journal about it. Of course, everything's okay. I hate it. Also, like, there are multiple women in the book and they get almost no POV, and when they do, it's like, oh my, this sweet man in my life saved me. I could never possibly imagine being so brave. Complete tangent. So in the book, a really big plot point, and like part of the reason it's so romantic, it's so romanticized, is that there's this woman who keeps getting attacked by Dracula and drained, and all of these men around her are like desperately in love with her, and so they all offer to like do blood transfusions, which at the time was like a common thing, but nobody understood why sometimes blood transfusions worked and sometimes they didn't, because blood types hadn't been discovered yet, and so it was just kind of like a, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, we'll find out. And so in this book, the way that it's like talked about is that the reason that blood transfusions always work is because these men are literally pouring out their love for this woman, and it's so romantically written and it's so beautiful. But apparently it was only a couple of years after Dracula was written that blood types were discovered, and so it just immediately ruined that like romantic notion of why these blood transfusions worked. So finally, after 2 books back to back that I didn't enjoy, I ended up seeing Ballad of Snakes and Songbirds, whatever. I picked up the book because I really enjoyed the movie. My expectations for this book were in hell. When it first was announced that they were doing it, I was really annoyed by it. I thought it was a total cash grab. I thought that making a villain, a young, attractive, from his POV, was just going to like destroy, because we see so many times how when you make a bad guy the main character, somehow everyone justifies all of their bad behavior, even if the story is supposed to be an intent around like, this is what this kind of behavior will lead to. Perfect example being Wolf of Wall Street. All of his horrible actions lead to a bad ending, but all anyone remembers about that movie is that all of the fun things he got to do because he was such an amoral person and made all this money and did all this crazy stuff, to marry Margot Robbie with it. And I know for a fact that this is true because my old boss from the job that I quit, he had these terrible, we always had to do these horrible icebreakers at the beginning of staff meetings that would take literally 45 minutes because he just argued with everyone answers. And one of the things that he asked was, if you weren't doing your current job, what kind, like in this industry, like what would you be doing otherwise? And his answer was, I think I would be a stockbroker, or I would work in stocks because I love Wolf of Wall Street. It's my favorite movie. So I was really concerned that people were going to take this book and be like, oh, but Coriolanus Snow isn't that bad, even though he's making kids kill each other. But the reason that this book is so good is because it takes a character that is so clearly amoral, and you watch the progression of how somebody can get there, and that is so fascinating. She makes him really sympathetic in the beginning, where he's this young man who comes from a good name but with no wealth attached to it, and he's just trying to take care of his aging grandmother and his cousin, I think, and the only way that he can do that is to get into school and get a good job and to maintain this idea that he's like still part of the aristocracy, helping with the games in order to save his own family. It's not his fault the games are happening. Falls in love with Lucy Gray. It's like, well, he's helping her, like he's involved in the games and he's like playing along with it, but at least he's like giving her an opportunity to save herself, and she ends up doing it. So then you're like, okay, well, he's not totally bad. But then as he, his life falls apart, he has to become a peacekeeper. You watch as that needing to moralize. This is the trickiest bit of the thing that I think everyone falls into the trap of, is, okay, this action if I take this specific action out of context, I think that's a bad thing. But because that action would lead to something that's good for me, then I can moralize why doing this is actually a positive thing. Because we're inside Coriolanus' mind, we can see him moralizing these things, and you see how this this habit of making his own greed and ambition actually the right thing to do. It becomes a habit of his. It's juxtaposed perfectly against this character of his bestie, who comes from one of the districts and has all the privilege in the world, but hates where it comes from because he feels so strongly about the games being so morally corrupt. Which, of course, he's the only person in the room saying what we're all thinking. Like, of course the games are morally corrupt, but Coriolanus just despises him to such an extent and only is friends with him because it benefits him. And that continues to be the case when they get sent to the districts, and it isn't until it becomes more beneficial for him to get rid of him that Coriolanus does so. And he's able to moralize it in this way, and we see that habit becomes like so driven to the core of his character by the end, when even after all of this stuff that he's gone through and seeing all of the horrible effects of the capital and what it does to the districts, being in the poorest district of the country, the system has left behind his own family, and instead of fighting the system, he is still more inclined to work within the system as much as possible because of the privilege that he knows he can bank on. And it comes to a head when he realizes that he doesn't have to run away, and in order to moralize getting away from Lucy and going back, he has to moralize not only that it's the right thing to do to go back, but that Lucy Gray is actually a bad guy and is actually out to kill him, and that she's like the last piece in the puzzle, that if she goes rogue, then it could destroy everything that he's done, so he has to figure out a way to make it justifiable for himself to go after her. And it is so, like, that last bit where you like watch that process, and it's such an extreme flip from like, I'm in love, like on one page it's I'm in love with you, to the next page is I'm going to kill you, is so well written. The older I get and the more I interact with the Hunger Games series as an adult, the more I'm impressed with how good of a series it is. Put YA in this category of just like, it's not considered real literature, but I don't think that's true. And I think the longer the Hunger Games sticks around, the more we'll see it as a classic. It is so of the time that it was written in, impacted so much about culture and how kids my age grew up thinking about the world and thinking about the future, will be a really good series to study in the future looking back at this time. The next book I read, I really enjoyed. It was another audiobook called Hench, and this one was just like a completely random find that I found on Libby. According to Elise Myers in her most recent video, she said that authors don't like the term easy read, and I feel bad because I've described so many books that way, because in my head, easy read is like, oh, I enjoyed it. It's so well written and such a good story that like I read it through so quickly. It's not one that you have to sit down and study like Shakespeare. It's a fun, good read that you want to keep reading until you finish it. That's how I mean easy read, and that's how I classify Hench. So it's about this woman named Anna who lives in a world where superheroes and supervillains are just completely standard. Some people are just born with special powers and they can use them for good or evil, but both heroes and villains need a lot of support in like the infrastructure of their setup. One side pays more. We've got a young 20-something woman, Anna, who is broke and looking for work in the tech field and ends up working as a hench for supervillains in the like data field until she gets wrapped up in one really specific altercation with a hero that leaves her like completely decimated and having to use a cane. And in her recovery, she comes to the conclusion through the math of her spreadsheets that heroes actually do more harm than good in her world. She joins this supervillain and makes heroes' lives just mundanely difficult. She makes sure that their most embarrassing moments are highly publicized, traffic difficult for them to get to like events or press events or to be the hero of the day. It makes their lives mundanely difficult the way that all of us have to deal with the mundane difficulties of life. There's a lot more to the story. I won't spoil any more of it, but I highly recommend it. It is one of my top books of the year. I genuinely really enjoy it. Another recommendation for Hench is that if you know anyone in your life that loves spreadsheets, like my sister loves spreadsheets, this will confirm to them that doing spreadsheets is a superpower, and they will love this book for that. The next book I read was The Lost Apothecary. This was also a random find on Libby, and I didn't love this one as much. I had a hard time reading this one again because it's split in a couple different POVs, one of which is about this woman who, an American woman who is in London on a trip that she was supposed to be taking with her husband, but right before they took the trip, she found out that he is having an affair, so she's alone on the trip trying to figure out what to do about their marriage. She goes mudlarking and finds this bottle with a really interesting etch on it. She decides to spend her time in London researching to find out if she can figure out where this bottle came from. We then split POV back to where the bottle actually originated from. The apothecary designed for women specifically. The general needs of women, but also selling poisons that are often used on abusive men in women's lives. I finished this book because I really genuinely enjoyed the apothecary side of things. Couldn't care less about the woman who's going through a tough time with her husband. I just don't care. Her entire story just came down to like, I think I need to take some more time for myself. I don't care. But the woman who's helping people kill their husbands, absolutely I want to read about that. So I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. The next book I am begging anyone in my life to read. I need so desperately someone to read it because I need to talk to someone about this so badly. It's called Iron Widow. I love it so much. That's how it's described. A YA science fantasy futuristic reinterpretation of medieval China. It's a lot of words, so let me break it down. YA, young adult, science fantasy, because it is fantasy in its elements, but it uses like technology in the way that like science fiction uses it, but it's run on chi instead of like magic. Like chi is used as like the magic system in this world. And in the same way that like Lord of the Rings and really classic high fantasy uses the assumption of medieval Europe as its like baseline, this book uses medieval China as its like general construction. It's also loosely tied to the story of the one and only Empress of Russia. Oh my gosh. The one and only Empress of China, which is really cool. Basic plotline, and this is like, this sounds like a full book. It absolutely isn't. It's like the first 3 chapters. Wu Zetian, I think that's how you pronounce her name. I really hope so. Enlists as a concubine, their word, to avenge her older sister who died by pilots' hands. In this world, pilots are these acclaimed heroes that run these giant transformer type robots on chi, and in order to use them they have to use their own chi as well as the assistance of concubines' chi to run these giant robots. Our main character resents her family for how much that they don't care about that her sister died under mysterious circumstances, so she enlists as a concubine in order to find that pilot and him. She does, and in the process finding out that she actually has stronger chi and can pilot these machinery herself, which is massive. And this is just the first few chapters. It's a total revenge fantasy. It's so good. Falls in line with the we support women's rights and women's wrongs category of things. And I couldn't love it more. There are some aspects of it that like aren't perfect. The like romance aspect of it is a little trite, but the overall setup of the world building, the overall storyline, the twists at the end, it's a complete story but totally sets up an opportunity for a series that I'm so excited about. Apparently the second book just came out, so I'm really excited to go get it and read it, and I can't wait to find out what happens. After reading Iron Widow and not being able to get my hands on the next one, I decided to turn to a classic fantasy book and picked up Mistborn. It's me dipping my toe into Brandon Sanderson's book for the first time. Every series of his is like 15 giant books long, and they're all connected, and this whole universe. So I decided to start with Mistborn. It's a trilogy, standalone. The rest of it really intimidates me, so we're gonna start here. But I super enjoyed Mistborn. I love the setup of the magic system. I don't know if you would really consider it magic, but because it is described as like metals, but I really enjoyed the description of them, and it's such a clever idea of using metals in your own body and burning them. It's very unique power system that I have not seen before. I really generally don't like fantasy books that involve slavery. It's not a subject that's handled well usually, especially by white writers, but I really appreciated how it was handled in this book. I thought it was handled very delicately. The last 100 pages were a whirlwind. I did not expect that ending at all, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. I'm just waiting for them to be available at my local library. Okay, so last year I also started the Throne of Glass series, and I was reading these books in between all of the books that I've already described, but I wanted to talk about the series as a whole, so we're doing it at the end here, because it's also the books that I finished the year with. Okay, so Throne of Glass. Spoilers ahead. I'm going to be talking about full plot lines here, so if you've not read Throne of Glass series and you don't want it spoiled, then you finished the video, congratulations. Okay, so original Throne of Glass. Love starting with a tournament. It's also how I've started multiple D&D games of mine. I think it's a perfect way to set up giving an opportunity to get to know characters, but you always know that there's action going to be happening, and then you know that there's going to be a winner at the end. Second point that I love this series, a main female protagonist with an actual personality. Hello? Didn't know Sarah J. Maas was capable of that. I'm sorry. Feyre is a beige wall, in my opinion. Selena is incredible. Her like love of fashion and all things luxury is like such a fun tidbit, and it's not one that's ever demonized. Like, people make fun of her for it, but it's not demonized by any stretch, and I love that about her. She's young and she's snarky and she's full of herself, and I couldn't be more obsessed. It also was so clear to me, like, these characters were so well written and the storyline was so well paced that it made me think that... So I read ACOTAR, the entire series, before starting Throne of Glass, and now looking back, I found out that Throne of Glass was her first series, and it didn't like blow up the way that ACOTAR did. ACOTAR could be a whole separate video and like a whole separate discussion, and maybe should be, because I have a lot of thoughts about it, but that really boiled down to she desperately needed a better editor and needed more time to cook her ideas. And the Throne of Glass series proves that she's capable of writing these really great characters that are fully fleshed out, that have their own goals, their own ideas, and the conflict that happens because people's goals are the same or different for different reasons. And ACOTAR just feels so bland now after having read Throne of Glass. Okay, next book that I read was Crown of Midnight. Her slowly falling in love with Chaol. Listen, we saw it coming a mile away. Love that she had this little fling with Dorian in the first book that didn't go very far. Love how Throne of Glass ended, and how the setup of the tension that's already there in Crown of Midnight when we start, and we see that mask of Selena starting to break through a little bit. Her relationship with Nehemia is... Going back to female friendship, it just means so much to me. I also love how much Selena does not care about Elena, the like ancient princess who's traveled through time and space to come talk to her, and she's like, you are the chosen one who can fix all of this stuff, and she's like, I have my own things going on, lady. I cannot do this for you. I can't. It made me laugh every time they interacted, because I was like, this is an ancient princess who's coming to tell you that you're special and need to do things for her, and you're like, dude, I already have my to-do list. Like, it's so perfect. I loved it so much. And then, of course, the moment they mentioned, like, a missing princess of the other nation, I was like, okay, so that's Selena. Great. Moving on. But I did not expect her to be Fae. That was a surprise. I actually caught on video me listening to the audiobook reacting to the moment that she turns
into human, Chaol realized, gaping up at her from where he still crouched over Fleetfoot. No, she wasn't human at all. Selena was Fae.
What? Then I read Assassin's Blade, and I totally agree that reading Assassin's Blade as the third book is a really great way to read the series. Instead of reading Assassin's Blade first, reading a story where you know the ending is bad, it is such a great skill to be able to write an enthralling book where everyone knows how it ends. The fact that I spent that entire book hoping it would not end with Sam's death, even though you absolutely 1000% know that it's going to. Hats off to Sarah. I enjoyed the tragedy of Assassin's Blade so much for that. I also love the introduction of getting to know Arobin so much more, which makes the next couple of books so much juicier, because you see in time how he treats his employees. Then Heir of Fire. The reason I didn't love Heir of Fire is kind of my own fault. I sped through it as an audiobook while at my job that I hated, and so I wasn't super invested in it, and I was like kind of coming in and out of it a lot. I also think that of all the books that I've read of this series, that is the one to do it with, because so much of it is just Selena whining, which as a character arc is 100% necessary, and I think it was treated very well in this book, but it just reminded me of the fifth Harry Potter book, which I think is exactly correct in the same way of like, Harry needs to go through like some emotional tumultuousness, especially being a teenager. No normal person would deal with that without being like going through a really emotionally raucous time, but every time I encounter a book like this, my reaction is just, stop whining!
Shut up! Work it out! Stop your whining!
Going to a different land, training with Rowan, becoming Fae, figuring out her powers, meeting her aunt, I think it is, right? The queen, Maeve. Oh man, it's good. Oh man, it's good. One of the editor things that I would say is I think the audience could deal more with more information regarding the king a little bit faster. Big moments of understanding the king's motivations or powers or methods happen so rarely throughout hundreds of pages of reading that, like, I think it can give us a little bit more. And then Dorian's exploration of his powers and falling in love with that healer. Oh, so good. It also totally made me okay with Chaol and Celaena not being in a relationship anymore, because he's so infuriating to me by the time we get to Heir of Fire, because he's supposed to be this moral backbone against Celaena's very loosey-goosey assassin ways, and he is the Kingsguard for the most evil creature on the planet, who is like literally bringing in demons from an other world to destroy the planet. It takes him until he is personally affected by all of the horrible actions of this king before he does anything, and so it really made me okay of being like, okay, bye Chaol. We've got an Ice Prince and a Fire Princess who are fighting over the same continent and different nations who have previously had a fling. Can't imagine how that's gonna end. And then Queen of Shadows. Queen of Shadows, okay, I have to admit, it's the 24th book on the list. I haven't actually finished it. So I can only say as much. I just started part 2 of the book, so she just barely killed and destroyed Arobyn's stuff and took it all for herself, which I absolutely knew that's how she was gonna get the money for her army, and like that was very obvious to me, but I loved her getting her cousin. Her cousin's whole deal is so fun, and all of the different POVs there. Rowan coming. I don't love Celaena and Rowan together. I don't know really why. I think a little bit is the like, he's an ancient fae and she's 19 years old, but then it's also weird because she's the queen and he's like her subject by blood. I don't know. There's just some weird power dynamics there. I also just don't think that they would fit together long term, like personality wise. She's way too playful for someone like Rowan, in my opinion. Listen, I don't know how things are gonna happen. I feel like Sarah J. Maas is going out of her way to say that Aelin is not bisexual. There's like 3 different moments between Heir of Fire and Queen of Shadows that some woman starts flirting and she's like, oh, I don't swing that way. And it's like, I don't believe you. Everything about Aelin reads bisexual to me. I think there should be more bisexuals in fantasy. I don't understand why they're like completely disregarded. More LGBTQ everywhere, really, but bisexuals specifically, they should be everywhere in fantasy. But I'm really enjoying Queen of Shadows. I'm also savoring it. I'm not plowing my way through it. I'm not reading it super quickly, so I get to enjoy every little tidbit of it. I'm thinking of doing a full video on the Throne of Glass series once I finish the series. Would you guys be interested in that? Did I already just do that a little bit too much for a full video after the fact? Let me know. Can't wait to finish it, and I can't wait to discuss more books that I read in 2025. Thought about making a goal of myself for the number of books that I want to read this year, and I don't think I'm going to. I think I'm just going to continue enjoying reading for fun, something that I haven't been able to do for a very long time. Audiobooks are my best friend, and I think I'll probably end up reading more anyway, just because it's becoming more of a habit of mine to listen to that instead of podcasts or YouTube videos, and to sit down and actually read physical books that like makes me very happy. Let me know what books you read in 2024. Did you read any of the ones the same that I did? Do you agree or disagree about any of my adjudications, my point systems of these books? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. Mwah!